All right. Everyone can hear me pretty good? Good evening. Happy Halloween. I like the costume. Okay. Before we kick off, a few announcements. This Thursday, right back here, Orvis is doing their film festival, the Montana Film Festival. It starts at 4. From 4 to 6, they're going to have specials on a lot of their different products and items. They're going to have some refreshments, some snacks, and then the movie starts at 6. It's over by 7:30. So I think they wanted people to sign up, but I don't know. We can ask Adam.
If you don't get to it, it's okay.
Oh, you're back. Okay. Sorry.
I'm hitting in the crowd.
There's always one.
Always watching.
Yep. And that's about it. Everything else is in the newsletter. Before Mary talks, we're going to turn it over to Ken Kanicki. Last month, he escorted one of our veterans from his Project Healing Waters project up to Canada. We were invited by the Niagara Falls chapter of Trout Unlimited as a guest to their Soldier On event, which was a 3-day event. They did a really nice job for the vets in Canada, and they were gracious enough to invite us. So Ken is going to talk a little bit about it. Brian, who went with them, was going to be here, but he's out hunting. So, and I understand that. So that's good. But I'll turn it over to Ken.
You may have mentioned it. I may have not heard.
Yeah.
We are recording tonight for Zoom. Just to make sure everybody's okay with that. You're not going to be on video, but we upload it to YouTube at a later time. We just want to know we're recording the meeting.
Yeah. No cursing, right? No cursing.
I just wanted to take a second to go over the event because it had been in the works for quite a few years. Don Adele from their group had contacted Joe more than a year ago, and we were trying to work things out, and it just wasn't going good. And then they said this event was coming up. We came across a local veteran, Brian, 23-year Marine veteran, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm in. Let's go. This sounds like a great thing." Talked to the people up there. They're like, "Yep, show up." Wednesday night, we showed up at the Legion in Fonthill, fly tying, practice casting. A lot of the people had not done any fly fishing before, so it was all brand new. But they were all like, "This is the greatest thing in the world." The next morning, we met up at this private set of ponds, and this is that picture. Kind of hard to see because it's small. They actually brought in a piper. So they had a bagpiper like walk the troops in. They were trying to march, they're former military, but. And then they had some tents set up with water and drinks, and the fly fishing equipment was all there. We had tied some flies the night before. They were showing people, that's what we first did, is how to put the rods together, put the reels, string them up. This is from the last night up there. They actually, Bass Pro Canada donated rods and reel sets, and every one of the veterans got their own rod and reel set. And that's a picture of them there at the Legion when we had our final dinner. This is the Upper Credit River Trout Club outside of Toronto. As soon as we got there, we knew this was like serious. They had locker rooms where guys had their bamboo rods inside lockers and reels and all like Hardy reels, and it was serious. It was pond fishing, and I hadn't really ever done much of that for trout. It ended up being fabulous. This house here, it's unoccupied. It's been unoccupied for a couple of years. The guy who built TPC Toronto, he just spent $26 million on this golf course right next to this. Built the house a bunch of years ago, $8 million. He never moved in. So it must be nice, huh? But there's their ponds. You can see very well maintained benches, aerators, very easy to get at, great for casting. It was awesome. They had some docks that went out over the water. At first, we weren't catching fish, but we needed to get some info from the people there. The pond is very deep, and the fish tend to hold on the bottom, so it took us a while to we actually started counting down like how far, using little zonkers and little streamers, how far to get them down. A 30 count got them down there, and then everyone started picking up fish. Yeah, and there's one of the fish I got that they had a guide come over when they didn't want us to handle the fish because they were all being put back. They did, some of the Canadian people were allowed to keep fish, but just one, and even there, the guides like dispatched them and cleaned them for you, so you went home with them. Beautiful rainbow trout too. There I am. Had to show the young whippersnappers how it's done. It was really, really great fish and great fun. The whole event, excellent food. The people were super hospitable. This girl here, Nicole, she was from the Canadian Armed Forces. She had just gotten back from Iraq. So she was still, she was separating, but she was still active. And she came out, she caught quite a few fish, actually. She was very, it just started that day. She actually didn't even make it to the previous classes. She just showed up for this, got the casting, and was right in. So yeah, we had a really great time. I actually talked to Don today, Don Adele from TU Canada. He wants to help us on some conservation projects next year. They don't do any conservation work, the TU Canada group. It's all social and fishing, and they tie flies and just get together, but they'd like to come down and help us. So I said, yeah, when we get to next year, we'll let you guys know, and hopefully we'll be able to keep our relationship with them going. They would like us to bring some more vets up next year, so I'll be working my Project Healing Water folks, and hopefully we'll get some more people involved. That's it.
I sign up now? You can sign up now, yeah.
They're like, because they want mentors, which every person there, follow them around, help them cast, tie knots, show them all that. It was excellent. So yeah, if we get more people, we'll want to have more mentors with them. Anyone else?
Any questions?
Thanks.
Thank you,
Oh,
Ken.
yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So we'll move right on to our speaker. Her name is Mary Ronan. She is a educator from the Reinstein Woods. Mary's an entomologist.
Cool.
Yeah.
Aspiring. I think we can say
You know,
aspiring
she
entomologist.
She came out with us in the summer with the Stream Explorers and did a great job. She knows her bugs, so with that, I'll turn it over to Mary.
Thanks, Joe. Oh, I appreciate that. Oh, it's my dream to be called an entomologist. But I will say, I feel like we need to start all of these DEC presentations off. I was talking to Scott earlier. I'm Mary Ronan, environmental educator. So I'm not a fisheries biologist. We're really lucky in this chapter to have some presentations by our DEC folks like Scott and our Great Lakes team. But I'm a little bit different in what I do for the DEC. So as an educator, my job is to help connect people to nature and inspire the general public to take responsibility in the relationship with the environment. And so I work locally at Reinstein Woods Nature Preserve, so just down the road, just down Transit, for the DEC. But I grew up in Western New York, but I grew up in Allegheny County. So I grew up on the outskirts of Rushford, New York. So I like to say that the Genesee River just runs in my blood. That's my home waters there. But I found a lot of new waters to love a little bit further north too. But when I say we're going to dive into the world of trout, as all of you know, we're going to be looking at clean water, fresh water, especially, and oftentimes cold water too. So I fell in love with trout the same way I'm sure all of you fell in love with trout. That's why you're here today. I learned how to fly fish in high school and I was literally hooked. But I found out very quickly that fly fishing is hard. There's a lot of choices on what to put at the end of your line, what to put on your hook. And so I realized if I was going to be successful in fishing, I really had to understand more than just the fish. I had to understand their whole world. I really had to immerse myself in their world. And when I say immerse, I mean immerse. So this is Cat Creek in Arcade, New York. And this about 5 or 6 years ago, I decided to take up freshwater snorkeling. to really understand this world. So this is my brother. He's kind enough to go with me. We had fished this section for about a half hour. So I had flies, he had worms. Neither of us were catching anything. You can kind of see he's coming out of the water with a camera in his hand. So we'll take this underwater camera with us when we snorkel. And this is the footage that he came up with after that run. It was very humbling. Oh, we get a couple of strange people going across that bridge, like, what's going on? Yeah, I know, the snorkel, sometimes we have to have a brightly color. But yeah, I mean, the stretch of stream was full of trout. They weren't huge, but it was full of trout. And so, you know, I'm learning, every year, as I'm sure all of us will say, we get better and better understanding the fish. But what have really tried hard to do is understand specifically what the fish are eating. I'm looking at this and I'm still just embarrassed. Look at how many fish are in there. I did not catch one fish that day. I know. No, this was in October. This is a great spot. I won't tell you too much where it is. So I'm sure you're all aware of the types of trout that we have in New York State. So we have our native lake trout, we have our brook trout, and then around here we have our stocked brown trout or introduced brown trout and rainbow trout, our steelhead. In our Lake Erie fisheries, which I'm sure you're well acquainted with after the last few presentations, we don't do that like Chinook and coho stocking as much. We're really focusing on the rainbow trout. I love brook trout especially, so those are the waters I like to target. So that's where a lot of the bugs that you see today are coming from brook trout waters. But our trout, I like to say our trout are made of trees. So in our freshwater ecosystems, the food that's coming in, the energy source that's coming into the system is actually from what's going on around the system. It's all coming in from our deciduous trees, which every year, this time of year, they're dumping those leaves, they're dropping those leaves into the water. And then those leaves break up and provide a huge energy source for the animals, for the fish in the water, eventually. So as you're probably well aware, we have these different habitats in our streams. We have our riffles, our runs, and our pools. So what I want to do is take a little bit of a closer look as to what insects and macroinvertebrates in particular are living in each of these habitats. So when I say macroinvertebrate, macro means you can see it with the naked eye. Invertebrate means it doesn't have a backbone. So everything from our favorite stoneflies and mayflies to our leeches, our snails, our crayfish. So we'll start off in the riffle. Riffles are one of my favorite places to fish. So fish love to hang out here because the water has a really high oxygen content. As the water moves across these rocks, it's bringing in oxygen from the air and crashing it into the water. So we have high dissolved oxygen. It's moving, so it's staying cold in these areas, which helps hold more oxygen. Cold water holds more oxygen. And then it's also acting like a conveyor belt. So it's just sending food directly into the mouths of these fish. So in the riffles, we'll see a lot of our stoneflies. So over there on the left-hand side, you'll see our giant stonefly nymph. That's a huge shredder. So what this insect is doing is it's taking those leaves that are dropping into our stream and it's breaking those leaves up. Think of it in your kitchen. It's that baby in the high chair that's just like shredding food and throwing it all around the kitchen, which means there's a lot of food on the floor for all the other organisms to eat. So they're kind of breaking all of those leaves up. So some of our stoneflies are playing that herbivore, that shredder role of leaves. But then we also have our predaceous stoneflies too. So these are predators. They're eating other animals in the water. We found one of these when we were with the stream explorers at 18 Mile Creek, and Joe can attest that I just lost my mind. I was so pumped to see this. This is probably one of my favorite macroinvertebrates in the water. They look like little aliens. They're so cool. But for stoneflies too, it's important to understand how they move in the water. So our predaceous stonefly is crawler. So it's going to be crawling over those stones in the bottom of the creek. And then if it stops at any point, as you'll see this one right here, when it stops, it starts to do push-ups. And we were actually looking at that with the students. It does push-ups in the water. And so what it's doing is right under the legs here, it has gills. So that little hairy part is the gills. So that's where it's getting its oxygen. So it's doing push-ups to move that dissolved oxygen in the water through its gills. So stoneflies are great nymph patterns, as I'm sure a lot of us have fished before, because they're active throughout the whole year. They'll do a year, sometimes more underwater. And so they're pretty, you can be pretty confident that there'll be a stonefly in the water as long as that water is clean. So stoneflies are indicators of really high water quality. They need clean, cold water to survive in that area. So how many of you have fished stonefly nymphs before? Right? Okay, no, I'm a nymph, almost a nymph only person. So they're one of my favorite things to put on the end of a line. But I bet none of you have ever heard of a stonefly emerger pattern, right? And that's because if you look at their life cycle, stoneflies aren't like some of our other insect species. They actually crawl out of the water and then they go through that next step of metamorphosis right on land. So you can kind of see in that lower picture here that nymph or the adult is emerging, cracking out of that exoskeleton. And then its wings are expanding and drying, but it's doing all of that on land. So out of the mouths of our fish, but definitely lots of food for some of our terrestrial animals too. Yeah, you'll see. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if you see it happening, you can know, okay, they're making their way to shore and you can kind of fish that nymph pattern accordingly. But you're not going to really get that same thing that you're going to get with our mayfly emergers. Stoneflies, winter stoneflies, especially those little black ones in the upper left there, they're one of my favorite things to see because it means it's almost fishing season. Unless you're one of those hardcore people that fish all winter long, I applaud you. But for me, I wait for the winter stoneflies to start crawling on the snow. Or I grew up sugaring, so we used to see them crawling on the spouts of the sap barrels. But it means that we're starting to transition to that spring season. So mayflies are one of all of our favorite things to fish. A lot of our favorite patterns are probably based on mayfly species. Mayflies are another group of animals that need very clean water to survive for the most part, depending on the species. And when you're finding them in the water, because I know after this, you're all going to go out to your local favorite stream and start digging these things up, right? So for mayflies, when you find these in the water, how you can tell the difference between a mayfly nymph and a stonefly, you can look at their tails. Most mayfly nymphs have 3 tails, as opposed to our stonefly that only had 2. But I think the biggest indicator for me is if you look on the side, their gills are all along their abdomen. So you're going to see those feathery or plate-like gills all along the abdomen, as opposed to the stonefly, which was in the armpits of the stonefly. And mayflies, unlike stoneflies, you can look at a stonefly and you can kind of tell what it is based on the wing plates, especially, and the gills. But the mayflies, they have so many different body shapes, depending on the species. So we have our flathead mayflies, our clinger mayflies, one in the upper left hand there. So they are hanging onto rocks underwater, crawling around, scraping off algae off those rocks to eat. And so they're adapted to be very streamlined, so they don't get washed away underwater. And so when you do catch them, when you are imitating them, you're probably imitating them in what we call like biological drift, where they let go to find a new spot to feed in the water, or where they're pushed off of or carried by the current into a new spot. So that's what fish are going to see them the most, not as much when they're crawling around on the rocks. So for those, you can think like our March browns are one of those like clinger mayflies there. We also have our middle mayflies that have kind of a long, skinny, round body that kind of undulate and move in the water like a little fish. So a lot faster than our clingers as far as their movement in the water. You'll see them darting around sometimes in the shallow parts of the water. And you can think of those like our betas, like our blue-wing olives. It's a good middle mayfly. And in the bottom there, we have our burrower mayflies, those ones with like the big tusks up there at the top, those big feathery gills along the side. And those, you'll see their exoskeletons quite a bit in the water. But if you're actually looking for the living one, you want to take like an aquarium net and actually go down into the sediment along the side. This one's another spot, was found, I think, right in that same spot where I was snorkeling on Cat Creek there. And so for those, you can think about like our hex hatches are our burrowing mayflies too. But again, for all of those, you're going to see those abdominal gills and then those 3 tails that might look a little bit different. So mayflies, this is my favorite fly to fish, pheasant tail. It's my favorite fly to tie because it means I only have to have a handful of things on hand to tie it. My brother also loves bird hunting, so I have an unlimited supply of pheasant tails, so that's helpful too. But it's also very useful because it can be fished a lot of different ways. You can fish it along the bottom, and then you can also fish it as an emerging pattern as moving up through the water column. Because mayflies, unlike stoneflies, are floating up to the surface of the water and going through that hatch out of the exoskeleton stage right on the surface of the water, which leaves them exposed. And so that's a great time, as many of you know, for the fish to come up, snag, and feed on them. Mayflies are also the only insect species to actually molt again after they become winged adults. So they go through this subamigo stage or the dun stage that you'll fish with the darker wings that you can't see through. They're not translucent. And then they'll hatch out of that exoskeleton and then go into their final amigo adult stage, where oftentimes they have clear see-through wings. And then after they mate, lay eggs, and then they'll go in that like spent pattern there that we often imitate. So I have to say this is probably my most common fishing pose, especially during hatch season. Sometimes people are like, well, do you even carry a rod with you, Mary? Because I'm just looking up or I'm looking under rocks. But especially during mayfly season, because mayflies, they might, like our stoneflies, live for a year or so underwater. But then once they hatch out into that adult stage, they no longer have a mouth. They're no longer feeding anymore. So they really only have a short period of time, probably no more than 24 hours, to mate, lay eggs, and then die. So it's a very short, fleeting time. Their order in insects is Ephemeroptera, coming from ephemeral or short-lived. And so in order to make sure they can actually find a mate, that's why they all come out at the same time in those big hatches that we all like to catch just before, right? And so that pattern can be really fun to watch. They'll do like an elaborate kind of dance in the air as they mate. Can also cause some problems though too. Has anyone here ever driven through a mayfly hatch before? Yeah, had a couple of rough crosses through the Catskills where I couldn't see anything as I, spread mayfly bodies across my windshield. I think I stopped and took this picture and my whole grill was just covered in dead mayflies. And these events can be so big that they'll even show up as weather patterns along some of our major rivers. And so you'll see pictures of snow plows going out, plowing off the dead mayflies from the bridges after they're attracted to the lights. I was lucky enough to live for a period of time near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. They have a minor league baseball team, the Senators, that play right in the middle of the Susquehanna. And it was so much fun for me to go to a night game because the mayflies would just come to those big baseball, like people would be eating mayflies on their hot dog. Mayfly, they had hats with like mayfly as their unofficial symbol. So it can definitely cause problems. A lot of people, especially, Lake Erie is famous for having some really big mayfly hatches. But then for a long period of time, we weren't seeing any of those major hatches. Again, mayflies are indicators of good water quality. And so when we stop seeing them, it's also an indicator that something is wrong. And so seeing mayfly hatches again, especially on Lake Erie and in our Great Lakes, is a really encouraging sign for some of our waterways. But overall, our insect populations in general, including all these insects that we're trying to imitate in the water, are crashing. So it's something that our scientists are very concerned about globally, to figure out what's going on, or what combination of factors is going on that's affecting our insect populations. But for these ones, oftentimes it's an indicator of poor water quality. Yeah.
That brings up, when I was young, which is way before your time.
Yeah.
But I see other people don't remember. We used to have hatches of what they call, what we refer to as sand flies.
Yeah.
Along the river and the Boulder Lake, caddis.
Is that caddis? Okay. But you haven't seen that since?
I think once they started development down there, that a lot of people sprayed for insects, because your windshield would just get covered up going along the river.
You couldn't drive through it because
it was hatches like this, like show up on weather pattern hatches?
Driving through it, they got so thick on the windshield that, when you tried to use the windshield wiper, it smeared them.
Yeah.
You couldn't see through it.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it causes issues, problems, but overall an indicator of good watershed health, right? So definitely a concern. And I think I don't know if anyone here keeps a fishing journal of like what hatches off when, right? I mean, if that's super helpful as you're trying to predict, but it's going to be very interesting, and it probably already is if you look back 5-10 years to see those changes. And in some of our waterways, those changes are going the other way, right? It's getting better. But in some of our waterways, you might definitely start to see some impacts on that. But those stories, like, we laugh about it, but not back in my day, but that's important information. Absolutely.
The other thing I never saw is big X's back in the day either. How those things are really good to see along the road.
Well, I was wondering if maybe the other ones were
eating
more tolerant of poorer water quality, because the water quality, I mean, we're talking 60 years ago, that was
the canal,
different water quality than now.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I know that our heck species do tend to be a little bit more tolerant. I'm not exactly sure what the sandfly like specifically was. I don't know, Scott, but caddis, yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Chuck, 2 years ago, I noticed that too, and I worked down near the river. I took a walk, and there was quite a hatch of those guys again.
Of
this, like the old days.
But there
were quite a few.
That's good. Okay, so maybe we'll see it come back then. The other thing about the hex hatches, especially in Lake Erie, along the Buffalo River there, like it's so good to see those hatches again, but also remember they're burrower mayflies. So they are burrowing down in that sediment. And unfortunately for us, that sediment is where all of our legacy pollution has settled, and we want it to stay down there. And so one thing we do notice a little bit with the hexagene hatches is as they move, or as those mayflies are moving around the sediment, it is causing some of those pollutants to come back up into the water, which is just something to be aware of, but not necessarily their problem, still our problem. Did I see another hand? Oh, okay. Okay. Overall, moral of the story, mayfly hatches, best thing ever. So mayflies are my favorite insect by far, and I think it's because of that ephemeral quality that when you see one flying and the knowledge that that's only going to be flying for no more than 24 hours, it's a good opportunity to take a step back and realize how lucky we are, many of us, to have much more time on this earth. So maybe that's why I love them. It might also be because I would much rather see a mayfly nymph near me than one of these. So our Dobson flies are another one that we see in these riffle habitats a lot. Megaloptera. So these are our big Dobson fly larvae here. And then you can see the adult form down there with those kind of big tusks coming up. Interesting thing about Dobson flies is that there's reports that thunder triggers them to pupate. So dobson flies are like stoneflies in that they don't pupate in the water. So they'll actually crawl out on the bank and actually dig into the banks to pupate. So it's thought that thunder is a trigger for them, which I always think about, like, I don't know, I feel like that's a missed Alfred Hitchcock opportunity movie series, right? Like a thunderstorm comes in and all of these things come crawling out to cover the bridges, cover the banks of the river. So if we have any amateur filmmakers out there, you know, your next one. And this is one that I just love, and it's not going to help you at all to try to fish a water penny larva at all. They're just adorable. They again need fairly clean water to survive, and they're found in those riffle habitats. This is actually a beetle larva. And so this is the larval form, and it will turn into a little water beetle there. You can see its gills underneath. And you'll oftentimes find these with our clinger mayflies, our flathead mayflies. So if you pick up in that fast-moving riffle water, pick up a stone, and you'll oftentimes in good water see two of those together on the rocks there. Oh, that's a good question. I actually think they don't. I think it's mostly like surface level and like on rocks, but I don't think they know a lot about, it's like one of the understudied beetles out there for aquatic beetles is the water penny adult. Oh yeah, right? I know. Sign me up. So again, if you're ever bored in the stream, head out to those packs, those leaf packs, just to see what's underwater. A lot of us are used to using our hats to catch what's flying above water, what's coming off. But dig your hand down in and find what's in the water too. And you'll find, probably if you're lucky, you'll find some of those stoneflies, maybe even some mayflies in there. This one had I just was reaching in to make a video for kids, and this one had a giant, nice little crayfish in there too. But as those leaves stack up with the current, it creates this perfect habitat. It's filled with food, has a nice hiding spot for critters. And so you'll see quite a bit. I just recommend or ask that if you do pick up one of these leaf packs, tuck it right back in where you found it, so that we keep as many insects as we can in the water. Oh, there's some mayflies in there too. Cool. I never get past the crayfish part with kids, so. So as the water kind of moves into the pool, a lot of us know, I mean, it's hard to fight the current all day as a fish. So a lot of times they're gonna head into the pool, the slower moving water too. Plenty of food in a pool habitat just might not come directly to you. So this is where we're gonna find some slower moving macroinvertebrates too, that can also tolerate some warmer water. So as the water slows down, it oftentimes warms a little bit too. So it might have slightly lower oxygen levels in the warmer water. So we need species that can tolerate that. So dragonflies are definitely one of those species. Dragonflies can spend between, depending on the species, 1 to 3 years underwater. It's not a fly that I typically use or target, but it's definitely, you know, they're active in these areas, but mostly kind of along that bank area of a pool. Dragonflies have this really neat adaptation where they have a folded jaw into their mouth. And then that jaw, when they want to catch something, because they're big predators underwater, just like they are above water. So when something swims by, they'll unfold that jaw, reach it out, and bring it into kind of their mouth, which acts like that. So it's a really, really neat adaptation that they have. So even as a nymph, you can see that they have those huge eyes. So they're using those to hunt underwater. And then their gills are actually internal. So they're inside their abdomen. So they'll suck in water to push through their gills. Then they'll shoot it out their rear end to kind of jet propel themselves through the water too. They can stay underwater for sometimes 3 years in this stage. And then they will crawl out. Again, they emerge on land. So they'll crawl out to like a picnic table or a piece of grass or a tree, and they'll crack out of their exoskeleton and then emerge out with their big dragonfly wings too. I might have a picture of, oh, here we go. So you can see it there. They kind of fold backwards as they come out, and then it takes a little bit for their wings to dry. So in the summertime, like around the ponds at Reinstein Woods, a lot of times in the morning, you can catch them in this stage where they're not able to fly yet. And you can get a really up close look at the dragonflies. That's a good question. They can, like I'll catch them, especially in like the pond habitat, but even in the stream, if you take a net and dig down into the mud, they'll hide in that mud and then they'll come out to hunt too. So they can actually tolerate lower oxygen levels too. If they need to, they can come out of the water and get oxygen directly through their exoskeleton. So that allows them to tolerate some polluted waters. Exactly. Yeah, warmer waters too. And then they're closely related to damselflies. So in the nymph stage, damselflies look a lot different because they have that long, skinny body. And then they also have those 3 tails that are more like paddle-like, and they kind of sit on top of each other. That top one kind of sits on top. And so that, even though mayflies, we said, also have those 3 tails, you'll notice there's no gills along the abdomen. And that's because those 3 tails of a damselfly, those are the damselfly gills. So be gentle with them if you catch them, because that's how they breathe. But they also have that adaptation like dragonflies where they can unhinge their jaw and bring it in. I just feel like we're missing some great Halloween costume opportunities here with this, right? Next year, like someone come up with this. Yeah.
How long does dragonfly live?
That's a good, they'll live like all summer long here. So let's say they might even emerge like a few months, but then some of our dragonflies will actually migrate south too. Yeah, it's like green darners will migrate south. So quite a bit longer, especially than like our mayflies, definitely longer than our mayflies, but longer than some of our other insects. And then I love having dragonflies around because above water, like when they're zipping around our heads, they're catching mosquitoes all day long, but they're doing the same thing underwater too. So they have a great impact on our mosquito population.
Last fall, September. I don't know if it was something special this year, but there was 2 days that the migration of green darners.
Someone else mentioned this.
Literally thousands. You can stand in my yard and see thousands of them going over.
That's so cool. Someone else mentioned that too, and I've never seen it.
They were eating, but then a thunderstorm coming in right ahead of the front, they were using that to go south.
That's cool.
It's like lots of birds shooting right over the treetops by the thousands.
Did that go in your nature journal? Someone record that so we know, like those are the things that we need to remember. So when we're like, man, it's been 20 years, we've never seen this. Now that might be an anomaly because like I know that they migrate and yeah, and small, but like this year seemed to have been like a crazy year. And you'll see it too along a lot of like the Lake Erie waterfronts too. We'll get some of these migrations that move through, but that's really neat. All right, and then caddisflies. So caddisflies are another one of our favorites to imitate. This is one that I usually imitate a lot more often as a dry fly. So we have the free living caddisflies, the net spinning caddisflies, and then the case builder caddisflies too. So depending on the species, they'll build these protective homes out of grasses and sticks or small stones in the river. And those homes not only act as camouflage and like a trailer home that they're carrying around with them, but it also helps water move through their past their body and helps dissolved oxygen get into their body as well. So they're kind of strategic in how it has water move through. And caddisfly species are another one where depending on the type of species, some need clean water to survive, like some of our free living ones, and then some can survive in somewhat polluted water. Some people have gotten creative, so caddisflies will tend to, build their case out of whatever they are surrounded by. So if you surround them by precious metals, they will build a case of precious metals. And then caddisflies are another favorite to fish as their emerging pattern or in their pupal form, because they'll do what some of our mayflies do. They'll rise to the surface, they'll hatch out, and they'll just hang out for a minute on their exoskeleton like a little floating raft. And it's just like prime pickings for our trout to come up and feed at this stage. But if they're lucky enough to get away, you'll see them in their adult form there. They, are fairly closely related to butterflies and moths. So they have those like bigger wings, but in that tent-shaped pattern there.
So you put only for extremely short period of time?
No, I don't think it's very short, because they'll make their like pupal casings underwater and then they'll emerge. Yeah, then they come out to actually crack out of there. But I don't know for exactly how long they stay in that stage. And I'm assuming it varies by species. Then when they're in their cases, yeah. And then another one that we're gonna start imitating a lot more, or I start using a lot more in the winter time, is our Diptera species. So especially like our midge species is a nice one to fish in the winter, because they'll actually, one of the few insects that can go through a life cycle even in the winter. You see winter midges flying around on a warmer day. And so for these, they also can tolerate low oxygen in the water and higher levels of pollution because they have breathing tubes. So that allows them to get oxygen directly out of the air instead of in the surrounding water. So they can tolerate some higher levels of pollution. But in that pupal form, as they rise to the surface, you use some creative and interesting patterns to mimic that. A lot of times, if you put a little flash, or you'll notice this when you're looking at midge patterns, there'll be a little flash on the fly to kind of imitate where the gases get trapped. As they rise, they kind of go up and down as they rise to the surface. And so those gases give off like a little sheen. And so you can imitate that with a little flash on your fly. All right, so we obviously have quite a few different macroinvertebrates in our waters, and while it's really cool to look at them, I'm obviously obsessed with them in their nymph stage. They can also tell us quite a bit about our water quality just by what we find in the water. So for example, when we go out with students and we collect in different water bodies, these are some of the animals we might find. And so some of them, like our water scorpion, like our leeches, they can tolerate high levels of pollution, especially our water scorpion. You can see the breathing tube out the back there. So it can get oxygen from the air. So it can tolerate fairly polluted water with low oxygen. Whereas we mentioned before, our mayflies and our stoneflies are very intolerant of pollution. And so you can actually there's various ways to calculate what's called a biotic index. Based on the animals that you find and how tolerant they are of pollution, you can assign a water body a score, and that's going to tell you how healthy that body of water is. And so here you can see like the class 1 organisms were the ones that we were talking about, stoneflies, mayflies, and then some of our Trichoptera, our caddisflies there. Sometimes what you'll see, a water body will be given an EPT score. So that's Ephemeroptera, our mayflies, Plecoptera, our stoneflies, and Trichoptera, our caddisflies. And so how many of those that you find in comparison to all of the other animals that you collect when you do a survey can indicate how healthy the water is. And so you'll see that sometimes with like an EPT percentage. Yeah.
You can get a score in August?
That's a great question. I think that's our next slide. So when we went down to 18 Mile Creek, here's some of the things that we were finding. I don't think we did the official entry. I could go back and see based on what we found, because I don't think I sent you one, but I think it would be good. Because we were finding quite a few snails, which are fairly tolerant. We found some flatworms too, which are tolerant of pollution. But then we were finding stoneflies and different types of mayflies. Here's our water penny, which needs pretty clean water to survive. This was a beetle larva here and some fingernet caddisflies too. So overall, good indicators down by 18 Mile Creek there. It was really encouraging to find all that. So we were out, I didn't have any pictures of us actually collecting, but we were doing everything from picking up rocks and seeing what was on rocks to using what's called a D net. So it's a flat and then a curve with a net that you can kick up into there and kick up the rocks into there and see what's carried with the water. And then we also did a kick net where you stretch the net between two people in the stream and kick across the stream to see what is dislodged and flows into your net. And so we did a quick version of all of those and found quite a good diversity there with the students.
I think we scored it.
Did we? I know, maybe I did bring a data sheet.
Good quality.
I think I would have because we were working with kids. So, and I do think it was an indicator of good quality, but now I'd have to go back and check. So if that's something that you're interested in, boy, do we have a job for you. The DEC has the Water Assessment by Volunteer Evaluators, or the WAVE program. And so every year in the summer months, you can go out, you can actually do the training online now. You used to have to wait until they came to your region to do the training, but the training's actually offered online now. And then you submit to the WAVE program what water body you'd like to sample. You kind of coordinate that out if it's a need that they have. And then you go out and you use those D nets and kick nets and actually collect the organisms and then send samples back too. And so that WAVE data is used in combination with what our DEC biologists are going out and collecting to give us this overall picture of how healthy our waterways are. And so the DEC kind of rotates through the major drainage basins. I think the Niagara River Lake Erie drainage basin is set for 2025 to be monitored. And then usually what they like to have the WAVE data coming in the year before for that region to kind of be used in conjunction with what our biologists are collecting. But it's used to make some pretty important decisions or inform some pretty important decisions, like what water bodies are listed as impaired waterways, how our Great Lakes area of concerns are doing, where we might have nutrients. Some of our biotic index calculations are designed to show what organisms are found and not found there based on likely nutrient pollution. So maybe like sewage pollution or things like that. So it can be used for that. And then also to show those trends in the waters too. And they've really beefed up our DEC info locator map. So you can see a whole bunch of stuff when you go to this mapping tool on the DEC website. But in particular, I know it's kind of tough to see there, but there is an aquatic biological monitoring box that you can check. And if you zoom in on the map, it's going to come up with all these data points. And so, for instance, the one that it's hard to see here, have you noticed that I like Cattaraugus Creek? So I clicked Cattaraugus Creek, and one of these links is a biological monitoring fact sheet. And if you click it, it doesn't really come up and tell you exactly what they found in Cat Creek, but it does tell you how they scored it. So that section was scored as slightly impacted. And you can see what they were finding, for example, in the riffle habitat. There's our EPT score. So that's the mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies. So that richness is 10 to 14. So it kind of goes through species richness, looks into account like how many different types of organisms were found. So you can kind of see how well your section of stream scoring based on that. And then we take students out to do these water quality studies. So every year we go out for one big water quality event where this year we had over 400 students at 15 different sites throughout the Niagara River Lake Erie watershed, which, by the way, this is something I'm trying to push. So if you look at that acronym, it's NRLE, which is gnarly. So we have the gnarliest water around, right? Thank you. All right, so just use that. So that's what we always tell the kids, like, you're going to the gnarliest watershed, you're gonna collect data, So they go out and they perform a lot of different tests. And so you'll see them. We had a group at 18 Mile Creek, but we also had a group. Barry was at Mill Road on Cazenovia Creek helping out a crew. We had groups up on the Niagara River. And then we have groups along the Buffalo River, like Mutual Riverfront Park there. And they're all collecting the same data. So they're like, okay, at this point, like what's our dissolved oxygen? What's our transparency of the water? What's our nitrates? What's our phosphate levels? How is our nutrient pollution doing? And then they also, the kids are kind of like going through the motions. You know, some of the kids are like, oh, I'm living my like best biologist dream. And then they get to the macroinvertebrate portion. And on the Buffalo River, it's less exciting. But in all these other sites, this is where the students really fall in love with being out and in the water, is collecting this macroinvertebrates. And so we like to give them a big chunk of time to do that. I think these were your kids, Barry, at Mill Road, right? Yeah. So, oh, do we? Oh, that's great. Yeah, I mean, this group of kids, this is a group from Randolph Academy. And a lot of times these are students who don't do well in a traditional school setting. But they have a day like this and the teacher always says, it's so cool because they see their data published. We send it to NASA. They have a global database that we submit that data to. And then we also collect and publish that data too. And so the students are seeing themselves as true scientists contributing to community science data. And it allows us to compare these different sites. Yeah.
I know you know that Randolph Academy with Amber is one of our trout classroom programs.
That's these kids. Yeah. That's why we were so pumped. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. We were so pumped at Barry there because these kids, it's actually pretty interesting because they'll do this study at Cazenovia Creek and Mill Road in West Seneca, and they do all these tests. And they take it back to their classroom and they're like, oh, is this a good site to release our trout in? And every year it's like, no, it's not. And I think they take them to 18 Mile Creek. But it's still good. It's still good information for them to know and to analyze. I think, you know, Barry, did they actually release a trout? They had a trout that they didn't catch last year. They were thinking about releasing it during this study day. But yeah, that's that. And honestly, that program is so important to those kids. And they joined our Day in the Life program because I think they were already doing the trout in the classroom. So it's a way for them to do this year-round project, which honestly is what, I don't know how many of you are involved in like school settings, but this is what science is trying to transition towards, as these hands-on project-based learning opportunities for students. And so we're trying to expand these water quality study days instead of just this one-off day in October, working with teachers throughout the school year to do these throughout the year. So we would love, I mean, we had some help this year, but we would love any volunteers that would want to come to one of these sites, help us identify some of these creatures in a macroinvertebrate study, but also share about what Trout Unlimited does, especially at the conservation side of Trout Unlimited. I think that's a really important thing for students to understand. And every year we publish a report. So they're all on our Reinstein Woods website. And one thing that we really focus on is what those biotic index scores are telling us. And so this, I think, was a report from a couple of years ago where we were looking at what the land cover was as that top square for each site and comparing it to what that biotic index score was. So you can see some of the sites like Sprague Brook and the Elma Village Green with Buffalo Creek, they have a lot more forested and field land cover. They also tended to have a little bit a lower number, which in this case is good for the biotic index. All right, so that's mainly, yes, go ahead, Mary.
What slide going to pick?
Oh, this is a good question. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to do things like which sites have bathrooms? Because, you know, you're bringing 30 kids. Some teachers want to bring 150 kids to these sites. You're like, oh, you are limited to Beaver Island State Park. So sometimes it's logistics like that. We do also try to connect students with their closest water body, although some teachers do see the Day in the Life as an opportunity to take their students to a new spot. So for instance, we have a teacher at Riverside High School that likes to take his students to Murder Creek in Akron Park because it's such a different experience for them. So that plays into it. But then sometimes we just have to face the realities that we have here in Western New York. We have a lot of teachers that are within walking distance to the Skidjackwada Creek. And boy, we would love to get those kids in there and sampling. Delaware Park and Forest Lawn has amazing access, and it's just not safe. It's not safe to have students in the water that might be contaminated with sewage or other chemical contaminants. We have one teacher that goes in with full gloves, but they don't get to do a macroinvertebrate study because of that. And so we have a lot of sites that are limited because of water quality too. Yeah.
The teacher at Riverside, Jerry Frino.
Oh yeah.
He's in our
Oh, is he really? Oh yeah, he's amazing. He's there are some teachers out there, you know, we all say, oh, the education system these days, right? Like there are some teachers out there that are doing incredible things with their students. And it's great because we can use Jerry's experience and James Vitale, who's at Randolph. Those are two teachers who have built out after years these programs that take students to doing all these different field experiences. And so now we're starting to use those as models for other teachers. So hopefully we'll get some, I don't know if you want more Trout in the Classroom teachers, but okay, all right. Well, I think we can help you out. Yeah, okay. That's very impressive. Okay. No, we'll keep that in mind for grants. Yeah. Of chillers? Okay. See, there's always something, right? These days, a shortage of something. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. Okay, we'll keep that in mind if teachers express interest. Yeah.
Do crayfish play a role in this?
Oh, absolutely. So crayfish, depending on the species, they can also survive out of water. And so because of that, a lot of times when we're looking at how much pollution a species can tolerate, it is oftentimes linked closely to dissolved oxygen in the water. So crayfish, because they can survive out of the water, are not always a great indicator, but they usually need at least somewhat clean water to survive. So they are factored in.
I don't even remember where I read it, but crayfish is actually the biggest food for trout.
Really?
They're not number one thing that they eat.
Well, I mean, trout are visual hunters. So if they see anything bigger in the water, they're going to go after it. And so, I mean, if you see a little baby, I don't know, actually, I wouldn't believe them. I need to do better about cutting my trout stomachs open, but I like to just let them go. Any other questions about what we talked about, the organisms I showed you or the programs that we do to help? Can I get it? Tell me about it.
Who maintains the specimens that you get for the length of time?
Oh, that's a good question. You can put them, I'm trying to think what they suggest for the WAVE program, but you can put them in alcohol or even hand sanitizer to preserve them. There is a really interesting method where you can put them in hand sanitizer and then you actually boil it and it gets the bubbles out. So it creates this like clear gel in there. But then I guess I should point out that we do ask, the DEC does ask that you don't actually remove the specimens from the water without a permit. And so for the WAVE program especially, you're under this kind of like blanket permit for collecting. And then, you know, for ours, we have kind of that permit. And then we also are doing like immediate release too after categorizing. It is to collect, and you know, I will say I'm not part of that regulatory, but it's that collect and possession of any of these animals, you do need like a special permit, even to do it for like educational purposes. And so even like, you know, you think of like, how many of you had a teacher who raised frogs or tadpoles in the classroom? Yeah, and so we do try to make it easy, where it's like a pretty simple form that like a teacher can fill out online. But the idea is that we're not damaging these environments. And for a lot of times it's like there might be one target species, maybe in like a crayfish, that you might be targeting for like bait that someone might go out and collect a lot of and then have impact. So there's kind of that blanket permit for collect and possess. Yeah. We always got to put a damper on it, right? Yeah.
Do they live in the water their entire life?
Yes, I think so. Although I do think they have some capacity to survive out of water, at least like limited out of water, but I think they're in the water their whole life. They're both isopods, so in like the larger grouping, they're similar, but they're not super close. They're not like the same as like two different mayfly species, but they're both. Yeah.
Another thing that people fish with is scuds. Are they actually a crustacean?
They are, yeah.
So they spend their entire life in the water.
Yeah. Yep.
Because you'll often find sow bugs and scuds together in that type of water.
Yep, exactly. And those are two that are also don't need necessarily super clean water to survive, which is, and the reality is some of our favorite places to fish, especially for like brown trout that can tolerate some warmer waters or a little bit more pollution, might only have things like, you might have a lot of success with a scud or aquatic sow bug. Yeah. Well, and those sow bugs are hefty too. So if you get them flowing through the water, if they're, pushed off by the current, that's a delicious meal for a trout. Yeah. Crunchy too. Any other questions?
I think I might have asked you this a little summer. Did you ever sample Wiskoy Creek?
That's a great question. So, Wiskoy is a little bit out of the gnarly watershed. And so for specifically our programming with students, we focus on like anything that's going into Lake Erie and the Niagara River, but they are looking to expand programs like the Day in the Life to the Genesee River watershed. So Letchworth did it for a couple of years, and then they just did it just along Lake Ontario the past couple of years, but they're looking to move down. So for student programming, I think we'll get there, but the DEC definitely does. So if you're looking on some of those, like that map I showed you, there is definitely data for the Wiskoy Creek. Wiskoy is one that I get a lot of people with the, when I was a kid, the hatches were completely different than what they are now. And so that's one, I think I pointed this out, but if you go to the DEC website and just look up like water quality, you'll find this biomonitoring, or if you type that right in, there's this 30-year trends in water quality. And I think that goes into the specific like watersheds too, where you can look at the changes in like the Wiskoy. But yeah, I don't have as much like data on it from like our sampling.
Does the WAVE program ever do it? Like,
yeah, so they do. I'm trying to think of what the Wiskoy would fall in. I don't think it would fall into like where they want to focus in 2025. But if you go to the WAVE program, it shows you, or the biomonitoring even, it shows you like the different target drainage basins. And that may have been one from a couple of years ago, but I think still with the WAVE program, you can contact the coordinator. I don't think they're going to tell you like, we don't want your data. I guess I'm not sure. But they just might ask like, here's a targeted area that we don't have any data on. So yes. Yeah.
They're looking at one thing they can't tell us. People say, well, such and such a hatch isn't what it used to be. They don't have quantitative data.
Yeah.
So we can never say, based on what PDC is doing, that there's less Hendrickson than there used to be.
That's a good point.
Because they didn't collect anything.
Yeah.
Talked about do that, but come up with a program to quantitate the bugs that are there now, but you have nothing to compare it to.
Yeah.
So, start something.
Yeah, let's start it. Right?
Can't go back and say, you know, there's 1970.
That's a good point. Yeah, which I think is all the incentive to get a program like that, you know, up and off the ground. Yeah.
Professors, what it would take.
Yeah.
Basically.
Oh. You know, we just have to find a very wealthy fly fisherman who wants to fund a grad student. Yeah.
Piggyback off what Scott was saying, I'm proposing for the sector and chapter to start now a long-term monitoring of like quantitative data.
Yeah.
So they have to like share their sample, and it'll be more in depth. But I was hoping to do that for Oaxaca and Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah. I want to see what's in Oaxaca. Yeah.
We're gonna do like a kind of like the tri-fold sampling, kind of get a more watershed focused picture. So we're gonna do macro sampling, red surveys, and then a temperature survey.
Nice. Oh, that would be, yeah.
In the next year or so.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And you know, it's for as big as the DEC seems at times, our staff is limited in what we can actually go out and collect. That's why we rely on organizations, or like our community, I should say, relies on organizations like Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper for the water quality data that they're pulling in. But anytime that we can add in community science data, it's great. It's just trying to figure out like where to house all of these data points. So I will say an interesting one to look at is NASA does have their GLOBE program, which has like, this is what we use with students. So it follows like very specific monitoring protocols and using specific equipment. And then you enter your data into the GLOBE program, and then it can be compared with people who are doing this data collection nationally and globally. And there is a protocol that we try to follow with students for macroinvertebrate sampling too. Some of our high schoolers are really good at it. Most of the times the kids just want to get in the water, and that's the experience we want to provide for them too. So we're okay with that. But for the wait for, oh, I am glad you asked, Mary. So I did bring some flyers for the program. It does say that you have to wait on these flyers. I don't think they've updated it, that you have to wait for the training, but when you go to the website, it does say the training's online now, but it also has the most recent like wave coordinator too. At least I hope so. So take one of these. There you go. Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, well, that's it. But they are online. They are on the DEC website too. Any other questions? All right. Okay, thanks for having me.